So one of the things that our Quaker, Indigenous Quaker practitioners from BC have taught us is to use the candle as a smudge, the light to bring back into your body, to restore and to purify yourself through that light. And so we offer that at this time. And we begin to reflect upon all the things that we've been through, all the things that we have endured in this life, and how that affects families. This is the Sisters in Spirit service of memory and remembrance. We want to offer this time for people to come and to be able to share worship. So we'll put this online as well so that people can join at their leisure when they're wanting to reflect. And so we'll begin with a prayer.
Akenanga hamba ne hiyo amba do hoste nintra ne yeskabi ngi jabike ne da hiyo da us kamin ne time bis be uncha hiru ne da angi a na ibije winda da wa kan ye uncha lu hatien etijat nanga hiyo hetene da na je dan chanda rami ya uncha pene winda ye wa kanet tawagia ndan to ada pagya ya miktine jese hechasinu hechen hechawanin da agichichi dab chans no ngicham na yeni wakma piahtia ungo gyam na engi jinanga echija yes.
And this is a poem that my sister Gloria read from Joy Harjo. And
a woman can't survive by her own breath alone. She must know the voices of mountains. She must recognize the foreverness of blue sky. She must flow with the elusive bodies of night wind woman who will take her into herself. Look at me. I am not a separate woman. I am a continuance of blue sky. I am the throat of the Sandia Mountains, a night wind woman who burns with every breath she takes.
And so today, as we commemorate World Communion Sunday, begin with the lessons of our Indigenous people, when we think about our communion with God and how we practice through ceremony, through things like the smudge and the sun dance and the sweat lodge. We do this work because this is what we were given, just as in the Christ story, he teaches them a ceremony, teaches them how to break bread with one another, how to drink the offering as though the body was invested in this. And so it is the body of the world, the body of creation that we are ingesting as we do this ceremony. And as we think about how God has given other ceremonies to other people, we begin to reflect on what our teaching is and what God says to our people and our ancestors as we step into this sacred day. I just want to read from 1 Corinthians 28 to 29. And this is often used as a way of admonishing people and telling them that they have to be to conform to a certain way of thinking, but it also says to me something else. So everyone ought to examine themselves before they eat of the bread and drink from the cup. Those who eat and drink without discerning the body of Christ eat and drink judgment on themselves. Interesting here, the pronouns. Interesting here that it is an idea that you must practice. You must go through the practice wholeheartedly and believe in order to receive the benefit of that. So without discerning, without giving regard or giving of yourself in this, it is very difficult to see the benefit when we go through ceremony. And this is something that our elders teach us, that you have to believe and you have to understand what those relationships are, how important those are to our people when we practice, and how we step into these spaces, so that it's not just about one group, it's not just about the rightness of a certain Christian way of doing things, but this says that there is God-given ways and seriousness of faith that step into these spaces, because that's important. So on this World Communion Day, it's important. So this one also kind of blew me away when I read it with the Mennonite Church. I worked with them a bit on their session, their workshop on Beloved Amazonia by Pope Francis. And what it says in there is, in the Eucharist, God, in the culmination of the mystery of the incarnation, chose to reach our intimate depths through a fragment of matter. The Eucharist joins heaven and earth. It embraces and penetrates all creation. For this reason, it can be a motivation for our concerns for the environment, directing us to be stewards of all creation. In this sense, God and encountering God does not mean fleeing from this world or turning our back on nature. It means that we can take up into the liturgy many elements proper to the experience of Indigenous people in their contact with nature, and respect native forms of expression in song, dance, rituals, gestures, and symbols. The Second Vatican Council called for this effort to enculturate the liturgy among Indigenous people. Over 50 years have passed, and we still have too far to go along these lines. So the reason this blew me away was because the idea that Second Vatican Council in the 1950s said we needed to change our way of practice to incorporate some of the Indigenous teaching is very new to me as news to what I hear from, especially over the last 50 years, about not doing a smudge in church, about not doing our ceremonies or not having the space to do that, not the rightness of that. And some continuing to say that our ceremonies are of the devil. So as we think about this, here we have the Pope in Catholic faith saying that we need to enculturate our practice. We need to listen to Indigenous people and bring that practice back so that we learn the meaning. And going back to the other scripture, learn the meaning so that we can follow this faithfully and not in a way that excludes people or practices. So that is a notion of communion and prayer. I was going to do a communion, a smudge right now, but they have my smudge over at with the elders at the meeting. So here we talk about this rightness of fact and acting on what we know. And here, the missing and murdered women, the efforts of the inquiry that completed in 2018, that had the report came out in 2019, the call to justice for the government that has been lagging in its response. There, we are not living into those actions, as we say. If we believe and we understand, we should act. And we should act in accord with what is important. So the Native Women's Association of Canada has created a database of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. 67% are murder cases, homicide or negligence. 20% are missing women or girls. 4% are cases of suspicious death, and 9% are cases where the nature of the case is unknown. Here, we understand that the cause of missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people is genocide, to change the dynamics of our culture and of our way of life by taking away a certain part of our community. And this was intentional, as we see with the residential schools, taking away the children, killing and changing the lives of the children so that it is very different from what we believe. So the loss of the lives of women, girls, and Two-Spirit people leaves everyone unsafe. When a life can be treated without regard, given no respect or honor, when people can be cast aside, then there is a large void in our community psyche about who counts and who matters in the world. The cause of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people is a community issue. It affects environmental, racial justice, gender equity, human rights, healthcare, social and economic security, and a host of other concerns that affect women's lives and family lives. The public inquiry began in 2016. It took to look into missing, murdered women, two girls, and Two-Spirit people who were disproportionately affected. The report was completed in 2019. The next steps of the action plan were announced in October of 2021. Very little consultation or involvement or participation with community grassroots members is occurring. And so this hampers our ability to find justice and to work together on some of these issues. Here, the names of Indigenous people, Indigenous women from our community who have been lost and are found on the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people database online. Brittany Bearspaw, who was from our community, who was died at 16. Cheryl Lynn Black, Delana Left Hand Dixon, who was another Stony woman, Desiree Old Woman, Gloria Kaylee Blackburn, Jacqueline Crazy Bull, Joey Tia, Patricia English, Linda Mae Scott, Misty Faith Potts, Pauline Brazeau, Terry Ann Dauphiné, Victoria Joanne Crochew, Tiffany Ear, and Glynis Fox. These are the ones that we know. These are the ones that we have records of. There are many that have died before this and after this that are not yet included in this register. One of them is, I have my Aunt Glenda on, her sister who passed away, Evelyn Snow, in 1977, died in Cochrane at the railway tracks. And so a lot of these women do not find justice. There is no culprit at the end of these. They're simply missing women or murdered women, women who have met with horrific circumstance.
Wagia bicha marpiada hibino Wagia bine oza zambino yo hibine Wagyan chahe chano Wagya wiya ejabi chano.
I've asked 4 women to speak on this issue different times, 2 that we asked earlier this year for the Red Dress Day in May, and my sister and another speaker who contributed and wanted to contribute to the cause of missing and murdered women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. So I'm going to play those now.
I think when we talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women, we're not only talking about women that have been murdered, that have been abducted, or that have been maybe trafficked, or that are away from the communities. We're also talking about women that are broken. We're talking about women who have addictions, women who have misunderstood their roles or who have been beaten down to the point where they no longer understand their purpose within their communities. And I think that every reserve is feeling this, is reeling from the impacts of this. We're seeing this in the high number of children in child welfare cases that are getting taken into foster homes. We're seeing this in the high number of incarcerated women who are now occupying spaces in prisons. We're seeing this also in the high number of Indigenous men who are in prisons because they may have been raised or they may have gone through a foster care system due to that break with their mothers, or with that the very first contact or the way that they should have been raised in the society or in our society prior to paternalism and colonialism affecting our people. So I think that when we talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, it is so much more than just, and I don't want to just say just to diminish, but I'm saying that it's not only the missing and murdered Indigenous women, it's the missing part of Indigenous women understanding their role. It's the trauma that Indigenous women have had to endure since the settler colonial perspective has come in and basically told our women that they are chattels, that their opinions and that their perspectives are not important. And I think that comes down at the community level in degradation of women, in looking at women as threats, or looking at women as to be seen but not heard. And I think women are coming back into their own power. Women are coming back into their position as matriarchs, and to restore the balance that always existed, women are stepping back up into the roles that we need them to step into so that we can restore the balance and upset this patriarchy that was forced on our people.
Next, we have Natalie St. Denis, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary, also a social worker.
Toninda Luisi, Mr. Hai Musco Esqueo, Nathalie Saint Denis. I'm a Mi'kmaq and Acadian woman from the Wabanaki Confederacy in New Brunswick. That's on my mom's side, and also have Kanehinage and Quebecois ancestry on my dad's side. And I'm currently here living on Treaty 7 territory. I've been here since 2003. I'm currently a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary, and was a practicing social worker in the community for a number of years before coming back, I guess for a decade now, before coming back to school to do my PhD. And my focus has been on Indigenous traditional healing practices within the Algonquin First Nations. So I've been speaking with grandmothers and women elders across the country to get a sense of surviving stories, as well as teachings and ceremonies that would support the healing journey, as well as reestablish healthy dynamics, relationships, and intimacy within relationships and families. But today I come to you to speak about missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is actually quite closely tied to the work that I'm doing. And what I'd like to begin with is to speak about the ongoing police brutality that exists within this country, Turtle Island. And the sad thing is the police brutality that we experience is not new. It has been going on for at least 150 years. But what I'd like to start to share first is for us to remember and name some of these women, so that we have a real sense of who they are. When we talk about statistics and women in general, I think there's a disconnect as to the lives that are impacted, not just the women who have lost their lives much too early, but also their children, their parents, their families, their aunties, grandmothers, and pretty well everyone in the community. So just quite recently, on June 4th, 2020, Chantel Moore, an Indigenous woman from BC, was killed by a police in Edmundston, New Brunswick, simply on a wellness check. And she was only 26 years old. On April 8th, 2020, Aisha Hudson, a 16-year-old girl, Indigenous girl, was shot and killed by police in Winnipeg. And on May 17th, 2018, Josephine Pelletier, a 33-year-old Indigenous woman here in Calgary, was killed by CPS, Calgary Police Services. She was shot 7 times by the police. And so I want you to remember, these are real women, real girls who are gone. They're no longer here, and they have a whole future ahead of them. And so I'll repeat their names: Chantel Moore, Aisha Hudson, and Josephine Pelletier. So as I was saying before, police have been brutalizing and murdering Indigenous women and girls for a long time, pretty well since 1873, when the government established a Northwest Mounted Police, so the precursor to the RCMP. And there are actual historical accounts, documentation within governments and museums now that tell us that the Northwest Mounted Police was raping Indigenous women and girls. And although there were reports by some concerned citizens about what was happening, the government decided to cover up. The Northwest Mounted Police decided to cover that up as well. And so if an Indigenous woman did come forward and for an official complaint with the authority, she most often was not believed and actually blamed. And if a case did end up going to court, the police officers were almost always found not guilty. And what was happening is the Canadian government, starting in the late 1800s, was strategically implementing policies that marginalize Indigenous women, because from their Euro-Western Victorian view of women in general, they were afraid of the power and the respect and the role and responsibilities that Indigenous women held within our own communities. And of course, depending on the nation, they had a wide range of roles, which included decision-making, powers at the political, social, economic, and spiritual levels within their own community. But the settlers were very uncomfortable with that, and so they implemented a very heteropatriarchal, oppressive systems within the reserves, within the band governance, and this completely fractured and dismantled our life ways and our relationships with one another, and really all of our relations. And so it's quite a complex story. But the result is that today, police officers and many men have normalized these racist and sexist conceptions that it's okay to violate, kidnap, traffic, and murder Indigenous women and girls, because society isn't doing much about it. The media often talks about the way they describe the Indigenous women who have been murdered or gone missing, blaming, right? They're blaming the victim rather than really looking at why this is happening. And as a result, those who have killed Indigenous women are not prosecuted, or very rarely. And if they are, they're found not guilty.
So that was a portion of that interview that I did with Natalie, sharing from Dr. Cheryl Bear and her perspectives coming from the First United Church in Vancouver, BC.
Well, the first time I ever seen anyone do anything sort of like an outward display of recognizing and remembering and honoring murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, it was on the Saboba Reservation in California, maybe 10 or so years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. And I went to this, it was a women's conference, and they had me in there. And there was a couple hundred women. It was a beautiful event. and there on a table, they had a table in the near the front. It was kind of like a little bit off on the side, but it was very obviously in plain view. And there were two chairs that they had put up on that table, and they were covered with Pendleton blankets. And I've since seen that done at powwows where they're going to remember someone who passed away, and recently. And but I hadn't seen this in like a women's conference, and so someone explained that they said as soon as they said this represents our the loved ones that we have, the murdered and missing, and they had different phrases for that back then. But as soon as they said that, my heart just like I just felt it in my body, and I just started crying because of remembering the ones that I know that I've lost, and how my first experience was when I was 15. And my dad put a paper in front of me and said, "Do you know this girl?" And I just finished grade 8, and I looked at the paper, and there was my friend who we have an auntie in common. And I looked at her and her face on the paper, and I was so shocked. And as a 15-year-old girl, that and she was strangled with the cord of her own hoodie, and that was so brutal. I remember just feeling like stepping out of myself, and just that terror. And so from that day on, every time I bought a hoodie, I would cut off the hoodie and I'd pull it out. And I did that with my son's hoodies when they were born. And finally, one time, I think one of them was 13, and I went to go and do that. And my son said, "No, Mom, this is, I want this." And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, and I just, now I have 2 hoodies in my closet, and they have still the strings on them. And now I'm 52 years old. And that's how long it's taken for me to sort of, but I still have that story within me, and so when I saw those chairs, that's what I saw. I saw Nina Joseph. And then when I was 18, I lost my cousin Kim. She was stolen from us and murdered, and and those things never leave you. We also had the Picton thing, and I was working as a pastor on the downtown east side at the time. And so there was a girl who got baptized in our church, and she ended up being found on the Picton farm. So those, and when it comes to the red dress, this art is so beautiful and subversive, and it, when you have an image of something, it'll change you in a way that that just a lecture can't. Like a story or a poem or music or artwork, it just helps us. And so the first time I saw the red dresses, I think I was at a Nate's conference near Portland, Oregon, and I think it's George Fox Seminary, and they had them up all in the area. You would go between the buildings, and some of them were like, blowing in a breeze, and it just it was so powerful to me, and I felt like I just wanted to thank so much the person who created this, who thought of this, to commemorate, to remember, but also just this stark reminder of these are missing people, these are real people, these are our loved ones, our beloveds that are gone and taken from us. So I'm so grateful for this, for the Red Dress campaign.
And we have Reverend Dr. Carmen Lansdowne also from First United Church.
Sometimes ecumenical conversations can be hard in the places where we don't have unity in our theological perspectives. And what I think we miss from that is the place where other churches are leading. The Mennonite Church is incredibly strong on reconciliation, and like purely out of discipleship in faith. Like they were not involved in running residential schools, but they were like, that doesn't excuse us from having to participate in reconciliation. And I think, there's a lot of challenges in rural ministry in those remote areas because so many congregations are missing paid accountable ministers and really struggling with their own kind of existential problems. And there is a lot of possibility for outreach ministry and even volunteer ministry where maybe if, you know, a region of ecumenical denominations came together and said, we're going to, you know, buy a cargo van together and have volunteers from our churches who pass criminal record checks, do once a week, like provide safe passage for people from Indigenous communities that don't have a way to get, you know, to or from their regions. Maybe that's something that we can do that's like a tangible act of reconciliation. I also think just writing letters, you know, like the number one way to make political change is still to write a letter to your MLA or MP. And, you know, Facebook activism is good for raising public awareness, but it doesn't necessarily get taken seriously by political figures, even if it's just a postcard. You know, if like Nathan Cullen wakes up one morning and he's got 600 letters from United Church people all over the Skeena region, he's going to take that seriously, right? Like he's going to start to advocate for working with the province and working with the, you know, regional health authorities and the RCMP to try and figure it out. But if he just knows that people care about, like they don't put the paper on his desk, that's not going to make a difference. And so I think that there's a lot we could do in terms of reclaiming our political voice as citizens who come from a particular faith tradition, but that can actually make political change through advocacy. It's one of the things I'm hoping we do at First United is to build out our legal advocacy program to be more than just direct social service, but also to start to work on government relations and building a coalition of informed United Church people all across the regions to be able to talk about issues that affect especially Indigenous people, but, you know, anybody facing marginalization. Because in the downtown east side, you know, people say like, well, nothing ever changes. And that's because it's not a place that will ever be finished. No, there's so much change in the downtown east side because people recover and stabilize and move out, or people get sick until they die. And the thing is, there is a constant pipeline of people suffering all different kinds of trauma all over the province who will end up there one day if they're not cared for by their communities and by our health system and our mental health systems. And the issues that face the downtown east side are issues that face everybody. And, you know, I think about my own experience as an Indigenous woman, and I just think like there, but for the grace of God go I. I mean, I grew up with financial stability, and that's probably the thing. And my parents got sober when I was in middle school, and that's probably, those two things are the things that's probably saved my life and why I didn't end up a statistic. I just read Helen Knott's memoir, In My Own Moccasins, a memoir of resilience. And I read her book and I just wept because I thought that she could be murdered and missing Indigenous women, or I could have been. Like, it's just, there are so many issues that we don't talk about in society around sexual trauma and violence, around the like unhealthy use of alcohol, regardless of alcoholism or not. Like, so much of what ends up in our criminal justice system is the like effect of people's risky use of alcohol, whether or not they're an actual alcoholic or not. People who would never beat their partners if they weren't drinking, or people who get behind the wheel and hurt somebody when they're drinking. And I think that, you know, as a church, I would love for us to really grapple with some of those things. And it's why I'm honest about my own background and the fact that I've been in recovery for 20 years and the fact that I am the survivor of sexual violence. And that's not something I have shame about anymore.
So I think all of these women give very powerful testimony to the work around missing and murdered Indigenous women and the issues that affect women and girls and two-spirit people who are marginalized in our communities and the work that must continue to go forward. A couple of songs here. One is by a Stony woman who has passed on now, and she was instrumental in the church and had been writing her own hymns. And so this is one of those hymns that we utilize in our practice. And I've shared this a few times and try to keep it current for people so that they're able to hear her beautiful songs.
Wakaching ju Oshimana Wakaching ju Oshimana Wakaching ju Oshimana Wakanejin Owagihangtat Wakanejin Owagihang Jesus Omagaktat Marpiakta Nibi Manku.
From Wendy Walker, who recorded a few songs with us, one most recently for the Truth and Reconciliation Day.
One light, we're shining through others, rays of hope, they're steering us through the storm and guiding us to the other side. With that one light, we are the one we can focus on whatever comes along. Together, hey, we're strong, we make one light. Oh, we're one light. Ah, yeah, we're one light. Ah, hey, we're one light. One light. We're one light. We're shining through and we're reaching up to touch the stars in the sky. You know, together, you and I, oh, we'll fly. And with that one light, we are the one we can shine so bright. We'll spread our love all around. You know, together, hey, we're strong, we make one light. Oh, we're one light. Ah, yeah, we're one light. Ah, hey, we're one light. One light. Oh, we're one light. Well, that's who we are. Yeah, we're one light. We're just like the stars. Hey, we're one light. One light. Oh, we're one light. Ah, one light. Oh, don't forget to let your light shine so bright. We're all one light.
Hakuna Jesus weyowi kakiwate moyan tapwe kamochi kiskagon Takuna piko eta mewashi Weyo win Ota aski kisiko me wasit way away o ta'aski kisiko.
And so tomorrow is the Sisters in Spirit Day across Canada. It is, we have an online vigil from the Native Women's Association of Canada that will be on Facebook. And there's an in-person vigil in Calgary at the 18th annual Sisters in Spirit Vigil at the Canada Olympic, or the Olympic Plaza downtown by City Hall. Lethbridge, Sisters in Spirit Vigil there, link on their Facebook. And these are all on the links that we've been putting out for people to go to, because we're encouraging people to take part. Also in Rimbey, Alberta, Sisters in Spirit Candlelight Vigil at 7:30 in the evening. So I just wanted to thank all of you for coming and taking. So I'm just going to stop the share, and if anybody wants to add anything, I'm going to open it up for people to talk. So I can stop talking. But go ahead. Let's Alyssa, please, if you wanted to.
I don't know exactly what I have to say. Thanks, Tony, for sharing those voices and videos today, and a good reminder. And it's really nice to come into this space and just have some time to reflect. And yeah, I think it is really important to show up in those community spaces. And I went to the vigil on Thursday night downtown, and it was amazing how appreciative people were of having non-Indigenous people show up to that event. And I think it does play a really big role. So I'm still trying to figure out if work schedules, if I'll be able to make it tomorrow, but thanks for the reminder of how important that is. I completely agree. Definitely be wearing my red shirt tomorrow. Thanks.
Thanks, and being able to be here and to once again hear and understand and remember that we are all called to justice, and this is the work of all of us to do. So I do appreciate that, and I will be participating online as much as I can with all of the rest of the other ones. So thank you again, Tony, for putting this on.
Yeah, I have to admit that I didn't understand the importance of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Day so much, because I thought, well, it's, it's the same for all women who meet tragedy at the hands of someone else. And I didn't understand. But when you put the statistics out there like that, and when I see it in light of generalized racism, then it really makes me understand how important it is to be a part of this and to, stand up for these women that have gone missing. Because I used to think, well, come on, they're women are getting in strangers' cars. They're always putting themselves at risk. They're maybe drinking or doing drugs. That's always going to involve a risk, but it's much more than that. And I'm proud to say that I have, since I've chosen to spend time with you and the seminars that you run and the services and the teaching, that I have learned to open my heart. And I wanted to thank you very much for that. And I will be at the Olympic Plaza tomorrow, because I'm lucky to be retired and I can go on a Monday. So I will be there. Thank you so much.
No,
And I've seen some of those clips before, but then they strike me in a different way every time I hear them, and just hearing how the roles of women were kind of disrupted, and that has led to women being missing. Like it's one thing to kind of hear about women being missing, but then it's another thing to kind of hear about the larger context of how that's, you know, missing to even like drug addiction. Maybe they're still alive, but they're still missing, and they're missing in their families and their communities and in their potential as people. And so, yeah, it's just, you know, whatever healing can happen to turn that around for people. I think it's really, really important, and important to reflect on it and just, you know, understand a bit more deeply of the causes of the missing, you know, or where it's coming from, and how it can maybe be turned around for people.
yeah.
Thanks.
I think when we think about that, when I think about that, I think about the Tito case, where that it's this general devaluing of women that make everyone become targets. And so as we work through and try to resolve some of the issues that are affecting Indigenous women, that benefits all other women and people who are affected by a system that says it's okay to do violence upon another person, and it's acceptable. It's not something that's charged in very great degree, or people get off from doing it. There's no legal consequence. And so in doing these type of efforts, it is there, I think, in the interest of everyone, that we don't want to live in a society like that. I'm going to turn to my Aunt Glenda for a few words.
My sister, who they found deceased in Cochrane by the railroad tracks, and I have no closure to that. What happened to her? The last hour or the last few minutes before he left this world, I wanted to be there with her, but it didn't happen, and I feel so bad. I feel that has caused me pain over and over the years. I wanted to know the truth, but there's no truth. There's no closing to it. I don't, and it's just been, that's how all these women who went missing, their loved ones feel, is they're still in pain for not knowing and known justice for them. That's a lot of pain for them.
Hello, this is Eleanor Thompson.
Yeah. And anything you want to add? Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to, I'm on my way to the wake. A woman went missing 2 weeks ago, and she was missing for a whole week before she was found. And her name is Cora, used to be Cora Bradburn, Cora what? And you know, she was found in a I think it's called a manhole. And this is in Thompson. And what I just want to share that people that die, not only, I mean, women, Indigenous people that die in that community, her death has been rolled out as non-suspicious of natural causes, but somehow I don't believe it.
Yeah.
I have a hard time believing it, because she was found from far away where she was last seen. So we have to deal with that too. Like, you know, when our sisters and the women of our, when they go missing and then they're found in this, and then we have to deal with that I don't know if I guess it's racism because the investigation is not it's not as thorough.
Mhm.
That's what I find it hard right now, because we had homicides that happened in Thompson, and they were ruled out as natural causes or self-inflict, and then 3 months later somebody comes forward and later on, like somebody comes forward and say this, they witnessed the homicide. So this time I'm having a hard time with that, and I'm going to go and be with a family shortly. I'm going there with a heavy heart. So I there is I feel like this movement or this organization have been going for a long time. I think longer. But it doesn't seem to get. I mean, it doesn't get better. I mean, for us in the remote communities where our women go to the city to go to school, or for better training, and that's what this woman went. He went there to take a few courses on being a nurse's aide or whatever for the care home, and she ended up deceased, or and that's what I was going to say. I'm hoping, of course, I mean, I'm hoping it'll get better, but there is that we have to deal with. I mean, in our remote northern Manitoba communities, where I have a feeling that we're still not seen as human. I mean, that's a feeling. I mean that was all this, like, because because of these residential schools and day schools. In retrospect, when I think about it, we were not seen as human. We were just things. I mean, like, it's hard to put a word to it, actually. But I am grateful for things like this, like that recent holiday. I mean, we just passed. I am grateful for things like that, because that's moving into it's coming to the open.
Public.
And I hope I hope that you'll remember us in my community in your prayers and thoughts. So because we feel so little insufficient. I mean, like, we're not important enough to for a thorough invest. That's how we feel. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Nice to hear you.
So much. Nice to see you. Yeah, nice to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for being here. God bless everyone. I hope you're able to make it to a vigil, or at least see the online vigil at some point. Take your time to reflect upon it, because I think it's important that we each keep that in mind and hold that space for those that have gone on. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, Mother of us all. So thank you, and go in peace.
Amen. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Ishnish.